until now, we've been focusing on the critical technical construction of this image, and it's intentionally flat. I meant to do that. Everything's sort of living in the mid-ranges right now. That's in order to preserve the quality so that we can add contrast later, which that's where we're at now. Let's go in and work on that drama, balance some color, but really bring the image to life. So I'm going to go full screen and pull in a bit, and I'm going to take a look at the arms. I think they're running a little bit saturated here, looking a little red. We go into the grade, into the color, and bring up another hue sat on top of the existing one that we used to adjust the color of the edge. I'm going to go into the reds here and drop that saturation down a bit. You can see how that immediately aligned them much more with the face. And I'm going to go into my value layer group here, bring up a curve, and want to add some good contrast to the arms because they're both pretty flat. We can use this tool, the targeted adjustment tool, to see where along the curve most of the information of this arm exists. And you can see it's mostly above the halftones in the 3/4 tones. So when I see the dot moving along the curve as I move the cursor around an area, I know that's the part of the curve that I need to steepen in order to increase contrast. So let's give that a try. And if that curve increased the saturation a bit, we can go back into the reds. Maybe drop that down by 10 more points. That certainly added a lot of punch to the arms. Let's take a look at the shirt. Going to add some more contrast here. Once again, using the targeted adjustment tool, just drag it around. You don't need to set any points along the curve, but you certainly could. I'll show you how to do that. This area here is just about the lightest, and we probably don't want to make this area any darker, so you can set a curve there to anchor it. Set a point there, excuse me, to anchor it, and then drag the highlight up. See what happens if we darken that just a tad. That really increases the volume and drama in the shirt. I think the sleeve here has gotten a little bit light. I'm just going to add a darken curve. And we're going to paint that in. And maybe here on the waist just a bit. Now, this is important. You don't want to start stacking curves on top of each other that do opposite things. That's referred to as cross curving. And what that's going to do is degrade the quality of the image. So if I have one curve that lightens an area at one point in the process. I want to make sure that I'm not adding another curve later because maybe I changed my mind to darken an area, and then I'm overlapping those two curves. So one's lightening, one's darkening on top, basically negating the other. So keep a close eye on especially your luminosity, your value stack. Make sure you're not contradicting any of the curves that you've done previously. A little bit is okay because I lightened that sleeve a bit and went back in and darkened it. I'm okay with that, but just pay close attention. Make sure you don't do that a lot. So another important point to mention here is that you can see I'm going into the individual components, the individual parts in the image, and I'm adjusting color and contrast independently. And that's because, especially since this is a composite, many of the elements need their own special attention in order to achieve that drama that we want. So if I did this overall, since we're still not completely balanced in these different areas of the image, things in one area might really look good and things in another area might be way too much. And I don't want to do that globally right now and have to like paint areas out. Makes it a lot easier since I have it set up in this really systematic fashion. I can go in and adjust every element really easily and get an overall look. And then later I can go back in on top and do a big global drama adjustment. So let's go down the line and check out the shorts. I don't have any color group set up in here yet. I don't have a grade group. Set that up now. Color on top, value below. All right, let's grab the targeted adjustment tool, see where the shorts are. Yeah, they're up a lot higher on the curve. So you can see where we need to steepen. And that's pushing the shorts a little bit blue. I'm going to bring up a hue sat and decrease that saturation a bit. That's desaturating the pocket blue too, but I'm actually okay with that because I don't want that to really pop out in a big way. So that's a nice punch to the shorts there. Oh, forget that. Let's check out the tights. You know, I don't want to do much of the tights just yet. I'm going to move on to the base here and create my grade group. So here's something that I want to do. I have the ankles and the head both as part of the base, and I want to adjust them separately. So I'm going to do two groups. And using the lasso tool, I'm just going to create a loose mask so that I can target each one individually because they look totally different in terms of value and color. ankles are running way too orange. I'm gonna hit the reds, desat those. And they're way too light. Let's see where they are on the curve. And so using the targeted adjustment tool, you can create points. You can actually move them too. But that increased the saturation again way too much. Let's go back into the reds, drop that down even more. All right, cool. That's a little bit better on the ankles. A little bit better integrated. Yeah, but down at the bottom where they meet the shoes, I think it's a little bit light. I'm gonna bring up another curve. Just do a general darken. I'm gonna do a little bit of painting in there. Maybe a little saturated overall. I'm just going to drop that down. All right, I'm going to go into the shoes now. Do the same thing. Just to make this quicker, I'm going to duplicate that group into both shoes. And bring up a curve here. I don't really want to adjust the whites too much, so I'm going to drop a point there. Oh, working on the back shoe. Going to drop a point on the sole, and then increase the contrast in the dark area of the shoe. Better. I can probably just duplicate that curve up into the front shoe group. And they're getting a little too blue. Back shoe looks all right. It's still really desaturated. I'm going to bring up my history palette and just check a before and after here. So check out the before and after, just going through individually and sort of just tweaking around with the value and color. You can see how much added drama we can do without even working in a global way, working in a really targeted fashion. There's just a lot more contrast. It's always important to go through and just go one by one and see if you can improve the contrast in each area in a relatively consistent way, but targeted, because you can see all my curves were different. depending on what tonal ranges were present in each area. So after I've gone through and done all that in a targeted fashion, I can do some global work and add drama. So let's take a look at the head here. I definitely want to open that up a bit. This is such an important part of the image that you want to really give access to all the features of the face and really draw attention to that moment that's happening. And we increase the saturation a little bit too much with that move. I'm going to drop the reds down. Might be a little too bright. All right, I want to brush a little bit more shadow into the ankles by the shoe. Gonna add a darkened curve. And just brush a little something in there. Nice thing about brushing in on a curved mask is you can change the curve. Darken that. And then switch to black and mellow out the mask itself. Just gives it a little bit more presence next to the leg there. Let's do the same thing on the front shoe. This is just going to be a subtle touch. Maybe a little bit underneath the tights up here. All right, let's take a look at the before and after. Now that's a pretty big difference. So looking at the before and after here, this is pretty awesome. So I'm able to create really dramatic shifts in contrast on individual elements. Now think about the way that we used to do this. They were targeted adjustments, and to do huge moves like this, it would introduce all sorts of problems into the edge areas between the masks that we'd use. And so this is a demonstration of the system at work and how effective it is. I'm able to shift things individually and make big moves on them and not really have to worry about creating any errors in mask edges. I did see a couple come up that I'm going to address later, but for the most part, this was a really, really clean and easy way to make huge targeted contrast and color adjustments that wasn't possible before. So what you're going to see me do next, you're going to be really familiar with. It's dodge and burn. And I was pretty tough on dodge and burn earlier when I was showing frequency separation. I don't want you to think that I don't use dodge and burn, but I just use it for contouring. I don't use it to fix stuff anymore because I have the amazing power of this new system of using frequency separation. So I'm serious. I really don't need it in my images anymore to fix tiny little things. I can do that with FS 2.0. But now I use dodge and burn in a global way to create more drama by contouring the image. So this is a lot more fun way to use dodge and burn, and you get big results really quickly. So the style of DB that I use is just super basic. It's with some curves. I bring up a group of curves that lightens and darkens, and I just paint in on the masks. I find it really flexible because later, if I need to go in and change the curve a little bit, I can do that. And I can also always go back and edit the mask. And that's what I love about painting on masks is it's just black or white, and you can always go in and change what you did previously if you change your mind. So check it out. I'll show you how to set up my DB stack. Now create a folder called DB within the athlete group. I'll bring up a curve that darkens just a touch. Duplicate that curve, the one that darkens even a little bit more. Fill both of those masks with black. This one's named minus, and this one named minus minus. That way I know which is the big darken, which is the subtler darken. So I'm going to do the same thing with my lighten curves. Plus, plus, plus. And fill these guys with black too. And we're ready to go. So now that I've switched to the brush tool, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to go up to the top and click on the airbrush tool. And in my dodging and burning, or my painting on the layer masks that are the curves that dodge and burn, I'm going to instead be adjusting my flow. And what that's going to do is prevent those artifacts that are a result of using opacity when we paint over previous marks that we've already done. So take a look, check it out. This is probably new for you, works really good. Now, what I'm going to do is just use flow now, and because I have it set to airbrush, if I change the flow, or what was previously controlling opacity, by just hitting one of the number keys, you can see now it just affects flow. And we're going to go all the way down to a 2% flow. We can achieve that by hitting 0.2. Now I'm going to work on the plus layer to start bringing up, opening up, or brightening areas. Just make sure you're switched to white. Now you can see how subtle these changes are when we look. Let's just turn that on and off to see the results. Got subtle improvements to the shape and volume of the arm. And that's good, that's what I want. Take a look at the before and after on this layer. As you can see, this is a pretty careful process still. And on this layer, this plus layer, I'm really kind of going more for the macro changes. And on the next layer, the plus plus, I'm going to go for some bigger moves where I can get some larger volume results. I'm going to change my opacity to 5 flow because I want to see this happen a little bit faster. Now, keep in mind, when I say global, what I mean is that I'm globally applying this to the athlete, not to the individual parts within the athlete. And keeping these changes separate from the background, and I have no problem doing that because of the way that I've prepped and cut out and filled the athlete group with pixels. And I don't have to worry about that bleeding into the background at all. I'm going to add a little bit more volume to the larger muscle groups, like the quad. And remember, I can always switch to black by hitting X and dialing back if I've gone too far, which I often do. Now check out the before and after here. This is giving me an even bigger increase in volume and shape in the athlete. So I'm going to move on now to the darken curves and follow pretty much the same process. I'm going to stick with a 5 flow because it was getting faster results. Now, notice the difference what I'm doing here on the darken curve. Before, with the lightning curve, I was trying to target areas that already had some kind of highlight that defined the form. And what I'm doing with the darken is the opposite. I'm looking for areas of darker value that show shape and looking to enhance those by darkening them even more. This is the process that gets you that sort of glowing look that you might be familiar with, especially in sports images and sports skin, but also in fashion. Now, when I said earlier that I don't use dodge and burn to fix stuff, that wasn't entirely true. It's just not in the same way that you're probably used to. I still will use dodge and burn to smooth out transitions between light and dark areas. So you're probably seeing me do that a little bit. It's worth noting. It is still a great tool for doing that. I just don't do it on such a molecular level. It's more to enhance the transitions between larger tonal areas. All right, let's take a look at the before and after on the darken layer that I just did. It's improving the shape even more and also smoothing out some of the weird tonal variation in the side of the face. So we're continuing to take incremental steps forward, and that's the name of the game. Finally, I'm going to move on to my big darken layer, and I'm going to move a lot faster through this because there's not a whole lot more that I want to darken. let's step back and look at the full DB stack before and after. Now, check it out. Each step in that DB stack and all the painting we did got us an incremental step forward in improving volume. And then looking at it all together, you get this overall improvement in the shape of the athlete. That's what we want to do, is increase volume in every case that we can and make sure that that doesn't look too cartoony or too brushed in or too painted. All right, so I really like all the contrast and drama that's going on with the athlete right now, and the background is clearly dropping off into the background, right? It's now looking really flat in comparison, so I need to jump in there and do the color work and add some more punch and drama there so the two come back together. And once again, I'm going to create my grade group with my color on top and value below. And in terms of color, I want to reduce some of these things that I'm seeing pop way too much into the foreground, like these hot yellow objects. So I'm just going to go right into yellows, reduce the saturation there. All right, and check out what that did. That also hit the greens in the trees, which I'm totally cool with that, because before those green trees were really coming forward, I think, and it was making it look a little too Candyland back there. I really want to subdue the background. I want to pull out some of the reds too, just mellow those out. And overall, it's looking a little bit bright blue in the cyan, so I'm going to reduce that a bit too. You see that mostly come out of these buildings, and makes the sky behind him look a little bit more realistic. Now, that's another move, flattening out the background, but that's just dealing with the color, so I'm totally okay with that. I want to deal with the background in maybe a similar way that I did with the athlete. I was DBing on him, and you can also DB on the background if you want to. I'm not going to set it up the same way here, but I'm going to use the same general concept that I want to either reduce or enhance volume of background environments in just the same way that I think of people or objects. And the way that I think about what I want to execute in this image is I don't want the background to overpower the athlete. I want to look at some things that I can do to continue to bring him forward, but also integrate with the background. So when I look at the image, my eye basically goes athlete, ship, buildings. Part of that is because the ship has a lot of contrast and it's really dark. Another thing that's contributing to that is the directional qualities in the composition. I look at the athlete, he's looking to the right, and that's moving my eye to the right too. He's blocking the left side of the frame. So what I can do is maybe reduce those elements in the background that I'm naming, because I'm looking at this and doing that same see and say game that I did initially, because I really want to just say athlete and sky, or athlete and space, or athlete and outside the frame, because I really love a composition that alludes to space outside the frame. And in a situation like this is an excellent setup to be able to exploit that sort of conceptual story that happens as a result of our composition and our subject. So I'm going to reduce some of those elements to the right-hand side just by lightening them a bit and see if I can push them back just a bit so we get a better read from the story and the perspective and the direction. So before I looked at color, now I'm looking at value. Once again, I'm going to pick the targeted tool. I'm going to see where this ship comes in. It's way down here above the 3/4 tones. Now, the sky I don't want to lighten at all, so I'm just going to click in there and set a point to anchor. Sometimes when you drop that point, it actually moves the curve, so be careful of that. And the buildings are kind of up here approaching the midtones. So I could probably add a curve that brightens that entire range. And pretty much leaves the sky alone. Now, I don't want to apply that across the board, so I'm going to fill the mask with black. Switch to the brush. Turn off the airbrush. Bring flow up to 100 because I want to hit this pretty hard. I'm going to set the opacity to 20%. Make sure I'm painting white into the mask and just start reducing the density or darkness of these background elements. All right, cool, let's turn that on and off. See how that gave our subject a lot more space? Now we want to look at the opposite of that and think about how we can integrate the athlete more into the foreground, because now that the background is really receding and a lot lighter and cooler, the foreground is looking a bit pale. So I want to increase some density in the foreground, and I'll explain a little bit more about this after I finish it because you'll be able to see what happens. You can look around and see the tonal areas where all this exists. And it's pretty much across the board, so I'm just going to bring a big curve that darkens a big range of the image. And look at that drama that got added. That's pretty cool. But again, I don't want that everywhere. I'm going to zoom out so I can use a really big brush. Switch to black, and this time I'm going to paint it out of the places that I don't want to see it. I up the opacity to 40%. So let's turn these value moves on and off and watch how we really flip the script on the background here. That's getting a lot better, a lot of added drama. And the nice thing about this is that through these, oops, I just wanted to reduce that even more and brighten this area. Now, just by paying attention to the composition and starting to tell ourselves and a little bit about the story that we're looking at. This is a really good exercise to do by naming things, stepping away from the technical aspects of the image, and really kind of trying to engage in it in a more poetic way. Really just, making up a story. Make up a story about your image. Tell yourself what it is. That way, you start to get a sense of the parts of it that you want to push and pull, or exploit, or get rid of. In this case, I'm starting to see the story evolve. I'm starting to see a story about some kind of storm behind the buildings because the clouds are really dense back there and they could be dark and ominous. And then we look at the direction of the movement of the clouds moving out to the future, off the frame, out to the right from the athlete. They almost emanate from him because he's the story here. And the environment is the sort of supporting props that we try to integrate into him so that that story just gets intensified by every element in the image. You need to be in control and aware of what every element in the image is doing. Nothing's left to chance. And you can tweak or control or use this whole set as props for the story, for the play that you're creating in this image. So really pay attention to that. Keep working that angle, and you'll end up with an image that has a cohesive, dramatic statement. That's always our goal. Now that this is really starting to come together, I'm getting distracted by the edges of the canvas here because I tweaked the angle. And what I'm going to do is show you how I set up a really quick mask. Just grab a selection just inside the areas that are transparent. And I'm just going to create a solid color fill layer, select the mask, Command I to invert that. So now I'm not quite so distracted. The black border might still be a little bit distracting to you, so we can reduce that so it's closer to the background gray. And that kind of fewer distractions you can have in the image, the easier you're going to be able to see the composition and the story. So I like where this is going, and I think I'm going to try for a little bit more contrast up here in the corner because I really want to reinforce this moment that's happening around the face and the connection between that face and the background and that kind of movement. So since I'm trying to enhance the contrast of a very specific area, I'm going to look at where the limits of that tonal range falls on the curve. Yeah, you see how that's starting to come up a bit? I switched to 100%. I'm just going to kind of lay it on there. Cool. Gives a little bit more punch and direction. I'm going to reduce it just a bit more because it's getting a little bit heavy on the building. And the blue might be cranking up, or the cyan might be cranking up a little bit heavy as a result of that luminosity change. Let's see what happens if I dial that back. That's better, that integrates a little bit better. And I'm also going to take a look at the reds of the building, see what happens if I reduce those even more. Now, I really only want that saturation reduction to happen in the area that I was just looking at. I want to keep these buildings kind of warm. So what am I doing here with all these lighting and color changes that I'm doing? I'm basically using old master painting techniques. These concepts have been around for a really long time. They're really important to be familiar with. The main one is that warm advances, cool recedes. And analogously, contrast advances and reduction in contrast recedes. So what does that mean? Basically, the further things are away from you, the lighter they get. The closer they are to you, the more contrasty and more dense they get. The further away they are from you, the cooler they are. The closer they are, the warmer. So that's a concept that you can always rely on when creating depth. And that's what I'm doing here, is enhancing the depth in the image, because space, depth, volume, those things are all exciting and they create drama. So if you want things to move away from you, just cool them off and lighten them. If you want them to move closer, darken them a bit, add some contrast, add a little bit of saturation. So once you set up that system, you can work within that system to tweak individual things. But if that's your sort of general approach to increasing volume and space in your image, you'll always win when you incorporate that and extend that. Let's do a quick before and after the grade to just see the changes that we made to the background, because it's really cool to check that. Space, depth, atmosphere, flat, everything's on one plane. You can see the differences between the two. So one more thing I'm going to do is introduce a little bit more of contrast to the color palette. This is just going to be a touch, but this thing overall is pretty cool. And since he's looking off into the future, off into the distance, I want there to be a little bit more of a touch of a story there, where there's some kind of warmth or positivity, you know, lighting, something from the sun, let's say, coming from off screen, off to the right, so that there's sort of an idea of a different space, a different color space out there that's it's a little bit warmer and friendlier than this cold, harsh environment. I'm just going to bring up a color balance and the midtones, and I'm just going to add some warmth in there. Definitely pull it away from green. You don't want it to be too magenta. Fill that with black. Let's just paint that in a little bit. Don't want to overdo it. I also don't really want to increase the warmth of those buildings right there, so I'm going to paint that back up. And I'm going to try one more thing. I want to reduce the density of those buildings just a bit, see if I can do that. That's where they are. I want to reserve that light area. Don't want that to get any lighter. Further flattening out those buildings and integrating those a little bit more with the background. Okay, I can work with that for now. Those are big moves. You can't be too targeted when you're doing stuff like this. You can't be too careful because we didn't break any of this stuff out into masks. So you're really doing some general changes to the image. Don't be too targeted. Don't be too dramatic. Just deal with the larger areas of the image in order to create more space. So I'm going to do a few finishing touches that are really going to add some snap and punch, final punch to the image, and we'll see what our final mood and grade looks like. The next step, what I really like to do at the end is I use a high pass in situations where I want to create a lot of punch and contrast. High pass just has a magical way of creating that in an image because it creates halos. Basically, high pass traditionally is used for sharpening, and people use it in low amounts in order to sharpen more high frequency or finer detail. I use it differently. I use it for drama at the end. So I'll bring up a high pass. Sometimes I'll do 75 on the value and set it to soft light. And what it does is it creates huge halos. I'll show you exactly how that works. I'm going to flatten up all my pixel layers. Convert that to a smart object. This might take a bit because we've got about 150 smart objects in this file. I'm going to call that big HP. And I'm going to run high pass. Let's try 75. See how it totally whacks out the image the way that it looks, but this might look crazy to you, but basically what it's doing is creating these huge halos around contrast. And once you set it to soft light, you'll see how powerful it can be to increase contrast and compress contrast. It's pretty cool. Now, a big high pass like that is also going to introduce some big color and saturation shifts. So a cool trick that I like to do in addition is to apply a hue saturation smart filter with the saturation dropped all the way down to that high pass. Now, that's why I like using a smart object whenever I can, is because these smart filters are always editable. I can go back in and change my high pass value if I need to drop it down or change it, but I like 75 right now. You can also reduce the opacity of the high pass layer a bit in order to back it off. And if it's adding punch and contrast to areas that you don't want to, you can add a mask and brush that back so that we don't draw more attention to those elements that we were trying to reduce in importance. Now, I'm going to do the same thing to the athlete. Notice I did this high pass underneath the grading. That way I can always change the color and I don't need to redo the high pass. But if I change any pixel information here, I need to redo the high pass, and I'll show you how to do that later. On the athlete though, since we have this all broken out into individual groups, I'm gonna have to do it on top because I'm sure you don't wanna watch me do a high pass for every single component that we broke out. That would be insane. So I'm just gonna duplicate all my groups. And keep in mind, there's color work in there, pixel work, all that. If we're gonna go back in and make any changes to that, we need to update the high pass. But right now we can see the results really fast by sticking that on top. Convert to smart object. Can run the same high pass we just did. Set that to soft light and see how it looks. Some major punch introduced in here. Let's turn it on and off. See before and after. Might be a little bit heavy. I'm going to reduce the high pass down to 60. Apply the hue saturation reduction. There we go. And I'm going to back off the opacity a bit down to like 60. I'm seeing one more thing that I want to do. The athlete's looking a little dark and contrasty. I'm going to bring up a curve and something that I call grade OA for grade overall, just a little code. I want to open him up just a bit and confine that luminosity change I just made to his upper torso. Maybe take it off his face just a little bit. Now I'm really happy with where I've taken this image, all the drama and contrast that I've created. Whereas most retouchers would probably want to just send this off to the client right now, that's not how I operate. What I'm going to do is step away, get a cup of coffee, get lunch, get my eyes fresh, and come back and take a closer look at this image, because the last thing I want to do is send this off to my client with any mistakes. And I want to make sure that my client gets an image that they could approve on round one. So I'll show you how to do that.